Hi, and welcome to a new series where I'll be teaching you how to make a 2D platformer in Unity. In this episode, we're going to cover creating a simple character controller with a double jump. So the first thing we're going to need to do is create a new project. Make sure you select 2D, and in the project name it whatever you want. I'm going to name mine 2D Platformer Tutorial. Once you have done this, click Create Project and wait for your project to load. Okay, so once our project is loaded, you will find that your project looks something like this. You'll have your hierarchy on the left, the scene and game views, the project and console down the bottom, and the inspector. So the first thing is that in the hierarchy we have our main camera. This will change this has a few settings. The only one we'll be looking at right now is the background color. So in the background you'll see that this color is the same as what is in the game view. If we change this to something like a bit better of a sky color for our background, if you just change things around, you'll find a color that you like, and you can leave it like that. I like to also have my game view separated from the scene, so simply drag it across a bit and place it next to the scene. Now, in the hierarchy, we need to add a player. To do this, right click and add a 2D object, sprites, square. And we're going to call this one player. Now you'll see on the right that there is a few settings: the transform, the sprite renderer, and the sprite material. So the transform is the position, rotation, and scale of the object. So we're going to leave that for now, as it's the right size for what we want. Then in the sprite renderer, there's a few different settings. The other one we're going to worry about right now, again, is the color. I'm going to make my player a yellow color, so I'll set it to that. And then we need to make our player interact with Unity's built-in physics system. So to do that, it needs to become a rigid body. So add component and search up rig, and then select rigid body 2D. In here, again, there's a lot more settings, but the only one we're going to worry about for now is the gravity scale. I find that 1 tends to be a bit slow and can make a game boring, so change it to 3. Then the one other thing to add to our player for now is a collider. So search up col, you'll see there's a few different colliders. We want a box collider, as our player right now is a box. So you can see in your scene now that there is a green outline around your player, and that is your collider. You can see that if we change the size to say 0.5 on the X, this collider has moved a little bit, so it's not quite at the edges. So 1 is perfect. The one other thing in our rigid body we did need to change is constraints. We need to change the rotation on the Z. Otherwise, whenever our player hits a corner, it will start spinning. And we don't want that. We want it to be a fixed angle. Of course, you can change the angle still through scripts. Then we need to add a platform. So we'll do the same thing as we did for the player. Create a 2D object, sprites, square, and we'll call this one platform. Now in here, you'll see we have another transform. For me, it ended up being a bit off, so if this is the case, you can press on the 3 dots in the transform and press reset. Now it's all set to 0 and the scale is 1. Now we want this platform to be below the player. So in the position, we will put the Y to be -2. And the other thing we need is for it to be a bit wider. So change the X scale to be equal to 5. Again, we can change the color in the sprite renderer if we want, and so I'm going to make mine a green. Then, again, this also needs a box collider. So add a box collider, 2D. And as you can see, a green outline has appeared in the scene around our platform. Now, if we press play, our program should load and you should see the player fall down onto the platform, but not go through it. Now we need to make our player move. So to do this, we need to add another component. So select your player in the hierarchy, add component, and we'll make a script called player controller. Click on new script or just press enter. The name will be what you set there, but you can change it to something different, and then create and add. Now in our project down the bottom, you'll find that there is a new script called player controller. We're going to want to create a new folder called scripts to store this in. Once we've done that, simply drag the player controller script into the scripts folder and open it. When we open it, it should open in Visual Studio if you have it installed. If not, make sure to install it. And the other thing you need to do is in Unity, you need to generate the C# project files. So if you haven't already. So go into Window, Edit, Preferences. Then what you need to do is go into External Tools and make sure that your external script editor is set to what you want it to be. So for me, I'm using the Visual Studio Community 2022. Then make sure you tick everything for the Generate C# project files and then Regenerate project files. Then you can close this. So if you've done that, you should get these Unity messages and some extra things added to the C# library. So the first thing we're going to do is delete all the stuff in the player controller class. So the first thing we need to do is add a reference to our player's rigid body so that we can tell it to move. So type in rigid body 2D, and we're going to call that RB, short for rigid body. Then the other three variables we need at the moment is two public floats. So public float, one for your speed, and 8 tends to be a good speed I find. So I'm going to set it to public speed float speed equals 8f. Then the other one you need is your jump force. So public float jump force, and set that to, I think, 12 should be good. Now we need also a private float for our horizontal input. So like that, and then the horizontal, we don't need to worry about setting any value, it'll be set to 0 by default. Now we need to get our rigid body variable to be set to the rigid body on our player. So on our, make a private void and called start, which will make it so by making a start, then it'll be called as soon as the player is loaded. So rigid body equals get component rigid body 2D, and so it'll search through the player object for a rigid body and set that to be the RB. Then the next thing we need to add is a another private void. And this one will be update. So the update means that it'll be called every frame. So the horizontal is going to be equal to the input dot get axis and in quotation marks horizontal. I'll show you how to change which keys this sets to in a minute if you want to change it. So then the next thing we need to do is add some more parts to this update. So horizontal, if you press D or the right arrow, it'll be set to 1. And if you press A or the left arrow, it'll be set to -1. So your rigid body velocity, which is the speed it's moving at, has to be set to be equal to a new vector 2, which will store an x and a y by doing that. So a vector 2 and the horizontal, and multiply that by your speed. So if you press the A key, it'll be -8. If you press the D key, it'll be 8. And then the other thing to add is that we don't want to affect our vertical speed. So set that to rigid body velocity dot y, so that is left as it is. Then the next thing we need to add is if we jump, it needs to add some sort of vertical force. So if input dot get button down and then put jump, and so this will get the button that you've assigned jump to. Then what we need to do is, instead of having the rigid body velocity to be y to be just left as is, so rigid body velocity has to be set to be equal to a new vector 2 horizontal times speed still, and then the vertical has to be set to jump force. And so by doing this, you'll find that now if you save and go into Unity, when you press play, if you press the A or D or left and right, they will make your player move, and by pressing space you should be able to now jump, as you'll be able to see in a minute. So you can move and jump. Now if you want to change your keybinds, then go to Edit in the top left, Project Settings. Go to Input Manager, and then the axes. Then the size is how many different inputs you have. So if you want to add another one, you would change it to be 31. Then you can see at the bottom, another one was added on. If you want to remove one, then simply make it to one less. You can see here that I've got a horizontal one, which is the negative button is the left arrow key, positive button is the right arrow key. So negative will return -1 if that's pressed, positive will return 1 if that's pressed. The alt negative button and alt positive basically means that those also will do the same thing. If you want, you can change in here to be joystick controls or whatever you may want. You can also see that we have a jump, which is we'll set the positive button to be equal to space. There's two here. This one's space, and this one here is equal to the joystick button 3. So yeah, if you want to have more than 2 different buttons that could be, say, move your character right, then you can just add like an extra horizontal and give it whatever other key. So the there are two problems at the moment with our script. The first one is that currently we have an infinite amount of jumps. The second thing is that our camera does not follow our player. So the first thing we're going to do is quickly add a few more platforms, just so we can actually get across and check that the camera's moving correctly. So if you do Control D when you've got the platform selected in the sample scene, then Control D, we're going to do that 4 times because I want 4 different platforms. Then select the Move tool on each of them and then move it across to wherever you want. I'll move this one across a bit, then I'll add another one which is up a bit, then the final one can go down a bit from there. Now we could make a new script which keeps the camera following the player, but Unity has a built-in function that does it really nicely and has some nice smooth effects. So to get this, go to Window, Package Manager, and then go to the Unity Registry Packages. Once we're here, you're going to be looking for one called Cinemachine. When you find this, make sure to press Install or Import to your thing. So Cinemachine, install, and wait for that to install. Okay, so once our Cinemachine has been loaded in, you'll find that you have a new widget up the top called Cinemachine. If we press on this, you'll find that there's a bunch of different cameras we can create. What we need to add is a 2D camera. So we'll press Create 2D Camera, and we can name this to Player Camera. Then, what we need to do is make it so that it'll follow the player. Simply drag the player into the follow, and you'll see that the game view has changed a bit. This is good. And so you can, if you want your thing to be a bit more zoomed out, you can go into your main camera and change the size. So in here, the lens orthographic size, change it to 6 will be further out, 7, or if you want close up, 3. So if you go to 5, which is what it is by default, I think that's fine though. So now if you press play, your player should be able to move around and the camera should have a nice follow effect. You'll notice that this outline stays on, but don't worry, when you actually get the game running, this will not show. So that's just, yeah, you don't need to worry about that. So now that we've got that working, we need to change a few things in our player's script, because currently the player can jump infinitely. This is not something we want. So if we go over to our script again, we need to add a few more variables. So we'll add a public transform, which we'll call feet. So this will get the base of our player and can be used for when we're checking whether the ground is below us or not. We also need to add a public layer mask, which we'll call ground layer. Then we need to create a few more floats as well. So we need to create one called our maximum jumps, which will be how many jumps it can do in the air. So here we'll set that to be equal to 1. Then we need to add another one, which will be another public float, which is going to be equal to whatever we want our ground check size to be. So we'll make it ground check size, and so we'll put it to 0.2f. So this will be the area that we checked for when the ground is there. Then we also want another private float, and again we don't need to set any value to this, So we'll just add a comma after the horizontal and we'll make it jumps left. So this is how many jumps the player has left in the air. Then we also need to create two private booleans. So private bool, and we need to do is grounded for setting to if the player is touching the ground, and the other one is can jump. And so make sure you separate them by a comma. Then we need to create a new void, which will be another private void, and we'll call it grounded. And so this will return information about whether the player is on the ground. So in this, we're going to need to add a circle cast. So to do so, we're going to do recast hit 2D, and we'll call it hit. And we'll set that to be equal to physics 2D and dot circle cast. How a circle cast works is that it will check a certain area around a point and return some information on it, including whether it hits anything or not, which is what we want to use it for. So using some brackets, the first thing we need to use is the position that the origin of it, so where it starts from. So feet dot position. So this will be wherever we set our feet transform to be. So the base of the player. Then the next thing we need to add is the ground check size. So how big an area it'll check for where it can find the ground. Then we need to add the direction. So we're going to do vector2.down, but this doesn't really matter which direction because we're going to be doing it directly from a spot. But if you need it to be further down, then so we're going to set it to 0f. So this is the offset in the down direction. So if we set it to 1, then it would be 1 unit below the feet. Then the final thing we need to add is which layer it's looking for. So the ground layer. And then that's done. Now we need to work out what to do with this information. So using this, so if hit is not false, so if it did hit something, then set is grounded to be equal to true, as you're touching the ground because it hit a part of the ground layer. Then the other thing we need to do is set our jumps left to be equal to our maximum jumps, so that you've got the full amount of jumps again because you're on the ground. Otherwise, if it didn't find any ground, then you need to set is grounded to be equal to false because you're no longer touching the ground. Now, we need to actually call this. So in the update, so every frame we will call the grounded. So we'll check if it's grounded. So grounded. And like that, and every frame this will run through. Next, we need to do something with this information. As whilst we've worked out whether they're touching the ground, it doesn't have any effect on whether you can jump yet. So if the jumps left are greater than 0, then we need to set the can jump to be equal to true. So if you've got more jumps left, then you can jump. Otherwise, can jump equals false. So if you don't have any jumps left, you can't jump. Then using this in the input for jump, we need to make sure that the player can jump. So to use two and symbols and then can jump. Then the other thing we want to do is make it so that if you fall off a ledge and then jump, so if you fall off a ledge, you don't have 2 jumps. But if you jump off the ground, you've still got 1 jump left. But if you fall off a ledge, you've still got 1 jump. So if the player is not grounded, so use an exclamation mark for not is grounded, then what we want to do is jumps left minus equals 1. So you've got 1 less jump if you're not already touching the ground. And that is all. So if you can save this now and test it out. So if we press play here, you can see that once it loads, you can move to, yes. So we need to add the feet to our player. So add an empty object, call that our feet, and we need to put that to a point. So you can see where its location is at the moment. We need to do minus 0.5, so it'll be at the bottom of our player. If your player is a different size, you obviously need to change this value. Then the other thing we need to do is create a ground layer so we can actually check if the player is touching the ground. So in each thing, you'll find that at the top there is the tag and the layer. What we want to obviously be changing is the layer. So add a new layer and we'll call this ground. Then if you go onto your platforms, you'll find that you can press ground. So we'll set all of these 4 platforms to be the ground layers. And then after that, on a player, we can set our feet to be equal to the feet, and make sure your feet make sure the player is a parent of the feet, so that the feet will follow the player around. Then the other thing we need to do is set the ground layer to be the ground. Now if we press play, everything should work smoothly, or almost everything. So you'll find that you can move across, your camera will follow you nicely, you can jump between different things, and if you jump, you have an extra jump in the air, but you can't jump more than that. Also, if you fall off a ledge, you only have 1 jump up. Now if we change our max jumps to, say, 3, you'll see that you have 3 jumps in the air before you can't jump anymore. And if you fall off, likewise you have 3 jumps and then you can't jump anymore. Obviously you can change some of the other variables if you want, like changing the jump force, your player speed, and also your gravity scale. So we change that to 5, you'll see that the player falls down faster. And this can also be used to get some nice effects as well, if you want to make the game seem a lot more fast-paced. So by doing this, you'll see that our player seems a lot more bouncy, whereas if you just set things low, then you can have a different sort of game. So this could be used, so you can change the gravity to be lower if you want it to be like on the moon or whatever you want. So thanks for listening to this video. I'll cover a few more things in the next episode. At the moment I'm thinking I'll probably cover collectibles and getting to new levels. I'll also try to cover other things like enemies in future episodes. Thanks and see you next time.